Hello class, this week we are going to start finally talking about some science things. Last week we had a pretest, and so I'm going to go through some definitions on this video. But our overarching topic is about theories about the origin of life and evidence of evolution. So this is a big topic that is kind of complicated, so I wanted to start by creating some vocabulary that we can all use together. But before we get started, I wanted us to kind of start thinking about science in a new way. So let's take a moment to ask ourselves these questions and maybe even write them down and write your answers to them. So the first one is, how do we know what we know? I like to question this because it makes us question if something is truly a fact or if we just believe in it because someone told us to. But also, how do we know what we know is true? There are different times where someone may tell us something that ends up being not true later, but how do we know when that's the case? What does it mean to prove something? So what does it mean to prove something's a fact so that we can for sure know it's the truth? What is evidence? Also, how does observations lead to evidence? And finally, what is a theory? So here's our important vocabulary words that we're going to touch on today. The first one is a theory. Then we're going to talk about observations, evidence, the definition of life, and evolution. So our first one is a theory. So please, I would encourage you guys to write this down in your notebooks and even pause the video if you have to. But a theory is a carefully thought out explanation for observations of the natural world. I also like to think of a theory as an educated guess. Some examples I have of theories are, I have a theory that Miss Brenna is nice because she always asks me how I'm doing. Also, we have a theory of gravity, which comes from observing many objects falling over and over. So if you drop your water bottle, it's going to hit the ground every time you drop it. So the theory is that there is a force called gravity pulling your water bottle closer to the ground. And then I have another question for you guys. Just what is a theory you have? Maybe you can create an example of your own. Our next vocab word is an observation. So an observation is an active acquisition of information from a primary source. Wow, that's a lot of big words. So let's break it down. So an acquisition, I like to think of the word acquire, which also means to get. So active is the current process of doing something. So we are currently getting information from a primary source. Primary is really important. Primary means it's coming from me, or I am seeing an instrument come up with a number. So our common primary sources, of course, are our senses. So we have sight, taste, touch, sound, and smell. But we can also have an instrument. One example is a thermometer. So a primary source would be me reading the temperature on a thermometer to know how hot something is. A secondary source would be something like Mr. Mike reading the thermometer and then telling me he saw it was at 30 degrees Celsius. So we would not want to use that observation because it was not our own, because as much as we like Mr. Mike and he is a very nice person, he could be lying to us. So we need to make sure we see it. Some great examples is I can observe with my eyes that the sun rises every morning. And I can also observe if something is hot or cold by touching it. So, what is something you are observing right now? Okay, awesome. Our next question our next vocab word is evidence. Evidence is very important. Evidence is the information acquired by observation or experimentation. So we have this word acquired again, so that means to get. So evidence is the information that we get from our observations or experimentation. So experimentation is setting up those instruments we were just talking about. And another important note is evidence tends to prove or disprove something. So a lot of times we hear the word evidence in court to prove if someone is guilty or innocent. That's a great way to think about it. But evidence can also disprove or prove a scientific theory. So remember when we were talking about theories just a little bit ago, our educated guesses, so we can either prove that our guess is true and factual, or disprove it and determine that it is false. So evidence is very important in that. I also have a question for you guys. We will be talking about how the Earth is formed next time. So I was curious if you could think of any evidence that you can see on how the Earth was formed. All right, now we are going to also be talking about life later on, so it's important to talk about our definition. Life is defined as the characterized ability to get and use energy, reproduce, grow, and respond to change. So let's start breaking that down a little bit. So it's a state of being that that object or that living thing has the ability to get and use energy. So for us humans, our ability to get and use energy comes in the form of food. We're able to grow food or grow animals and then use them as energy once we eat them. Also, we're able to reproduce. We're able to have children. We're able to grow. We're able to get bigger and mature. And we can also respond to change. So one great example of responding to change for humans is if it's really hot outside, we will come inside and sit by the fan. Some examples of living things are us, of course. And then some things of non-living things are walls, the desk I'm sitting at, or even the ground beneath our feet are all non-living things. So what are some other objects alive? How are some objects alive while others are not living? Is my question I have for you guys. Awesome. Our, I believe, last word is evolution. So the definition of evolution is a process that results in changes in the genetic material of a population over time. All right, let's break that down. There's some big words. So it is a process. A process is an important thing to remember. It also has to result in changes. Evolution has to change something in the genetic material. Our genetic material is the parts of our cells that determine what we look like, or how our body functions, or even our cells function. So, for example, if my mom has brown hair and my dad has brown hair, I will likely get that gene, that information, from both of them, that I will also have brown hair. It's also, evolution occurs in a population, an overall long period of time. So evolution is not something that each individual person does. If you guys have ever heard of or played Pokemon, where we have someone like Pikachu, who can evolve to, I believe, Raichu, that is not a good example, because as the Pokemon individually get older, they evolve. But what evolution truly is about a population over time. So a good example is maybe a bird over many years will develop a beak that is better at cracking nuts so that they can get more food. So how it works is the birds that have maybe a larger beak tend to survive and get more food than the ones that don't. And so that gene of a bigger beak gets passed on, while the ones that have a smaller beak die rather than having little birds. So also another example is bacteria can have evolved to live in very hot places. So sometimes bacteria can live in places that are over 200 degrees Celsius, incredibly hot places, and not die. And that's just because they have evolved and adapted to be able to live there. So, what are some things that you know have evolved is my final question. I hope this lecture was clear. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I will address them as soon as I can. But I'm excited to get started on some science material with everyone, and I hope everyone has a great day.